What happens when a president takes over a city's police force during a crime wave that isn't even real? This week, President Donald Trump announced he is deploying 800 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C., and putting the city's police department under direct federal control. He described the capital as overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals. But here's the twist. By every official measure, violent crime in Washington has dropped to levels not seen in over 30 years. In fact, violent crime fell by 35% in 2024. It dropped another 26% in the first 7 months of 2025. According to the city's own police department, overall crime rates are down, not up. Despite this reality, the president has invoked emergency powers to seize direct control of local law enforcement, something no president has done in a generation. Critics warn that this move is less about public safety and more about expanding executive power, setting a precedent that could allow future presidents to override local autonomy, even in your own city. If Americans let this slide, what's to stop the next president from using the same playbook wherever they see fit? The stakes go far beyond D.C. They reach into the heart of American democracy. Let's unravel how and why this happened, and why it could set a precedent for every American city. To understand how we got here, we need to look at the legal tools the president used, and whether this emergency was real or manufactured. How did we reach a point where the president can override local democracy in the nation's capital? To understand this moment, we have to step back to the founding of Washington, D.C. In the year 1790, Congress established the District of Columbia as a unique federal city. Residents of D.C. don't have the same self-governance as states. Instead, Congress has the ultimate say over what happens there. But under the Home Rule Act, passed in 1973, D.C. residents do get to elect their own mayor and city council, giving the city a limited but real measure of autonomy. This balance between local control and federal oversight has always been fragile. In theory, D.C. runs its own affairs day to day, but in practice, Congress and the president can overrule city laws, budgets, or even the police force under certain conditions. That is exactly what we are seeing now. President Trump announced that he is deploying 800 National Guard troops and placing the Metropolitan Police Department under federal control, invoking a clause in the Home Rule Act that allows such a move when special conditions of an emergency nature exist. Trump's justification is a so-called crime emergency, but the facts don't support the claim. According to city data, violent crime in D.C. dropped by 35% in 2024, reaching its lowest level in more than 3 decades. In the first 7 months of this year, violent crime fell another 26%. There's no wave of lawlessness. Yet, the White House paints the city as a war zone to justify unprecedented federal intervention. Trump's playbook is not new. Since the 1980s, he has used crime, especially crime in cities, as a political weapon. His infamous call for the death penalty in the Central Park jogger case in 1989, when 5 Black and Latino teenagers were wrongly accused, still haunts his legacy. In D.C., Trump has repeatedly threatened to strip away local autonomy. Just last week, he openly said that his lawyers are examining ways to overturn the Home Rule Act altogether, a step that would erase the city's last democratic protections and likely require an act of Congress. It's important to note that while presidents have sent federal forces into cities before, actually taking direct control of a local police department is almost unheard of. This is more than a show of force or a campaign stunt. It's a real test of the limits of executive power, with D.C.'s autonomy and the precedent for every other city in America hanging in the balance. If the public doesn't grasp how precarious these legal boundaries are, it becomes all too easy for the Home Rule Act and city self-governance to be swept aside with little resistance. The stakes aren't just about D.C., they're about the future of local democracy nationwide. But is this just another round of political theater, or does it signal something far more dangerous for American democracy? Let's break down why this moment matters and what the real risks are. Could a declaration of chaos in Washington, D.C. be more dangerous than the chaos itself? Here's what's at stake: the future of local control, the trust in what we call truth, and the balance of power that protects every American city. Just hours ago, President Donald Trump painted the nation's capital as a war zone, describing it as overrun by bloodthirsty criminals and unchecked violence. He dispatched 800 National Guard troops and seized direct control of D.C.'s police, an action he called a public safety emergency. If his words are taken at face value, the very fabric of the city hangs in the balance. But the numbers tell a different story. According to the city's own police reports, violent crime in Washington has plunged. Last year marked the lowest violent crime rate in over 3 decades, and the first 7 months of this year saw another 26% drop. Even Mayor Muriel Bowser, no ally of Trump, publicly challenged his premise, insisting there is no crime spike and condemning the federal intervention as unnecessary and dangerous. Despite these facts, President Trump escalated his response. He threatened to strip D.C. of its limited right to self-govern, hinting at a sweeping federal takeover that could erase generations of hard-fought local autonomy. Constitutional experts warn this move could set a precedent that blurs the line between federal and local rule, putting the independence of every American city at risk. Reactions split the city and the country. Many residents and local leaders fear this is less about safety and more about a dramatic power grab, using emergency powers as a pretext to undermine democratic norms. Others, stirred by high-profile incidents and Trump's heated rhetoric, welcome tougher federal action, convinced danger lurks even when data says otherwise. Civil rights advocates and legal scholars are sounding the alarm, recalling past federal interventions that left lasting scars or were later ruled unlawful. The stakes are not abstract. San Francisco now faces a legal showdown over unauthorized troop deployments, while D.C., governed under the unique Home Rule Act, remains especially vulnerable to federal overreach. Congress, not city residents, ultimately holds the keys to local power. This turning point forces us to ask, who actually decides what counts as an emergency? How much damage can be done, locally and nationally, when perception replaces reality in the corridors of power? If facts no longer anchor policy, we risk eroding public trust, media credibility, and the checks and balances that defend democracy itself. If the justification for this intervention crumbles under scrutiny, why move forward? And who will pay the price? The answers could shape the fate not just of D.C., but of any city that may be next in the federal spotlight. But how did this standoff begin? And what does it reveal about the tensions simmering beneath America's system of government? Let's dig into the roots of this unprecedented clash. What does this federal show of force mean for the future of American cities? And could your city be next? President Trump's unprecedented move to federalize Washington, D.C.'s police force and deploy 800 National Guard troops, despite violent crime hitting a 30-year low, marks a turning point in the balance of power between local and federal governments. Experts warn that such actions create a troubling precedent where the White House can override local autonomy by citing loosely defined emergencies, regardless of the actual facts on the ground. As one article notes, Trump's announcement is his latest effort to target Democratic-run cities by exercising executive power over traditionally local matters. This is not just about Washington. It is a test case for federal intervention anywhere a president claims there is a public safety threat. If the president can seize control of a city's police force in the capital, what is stopping a similar move in Seattle, Atlanta, or even your own hometown, especially if local leaders disagree with federal policy? The danger grows when manufactured crises are used to justify federal action. In D.C., crime statistics show a continuing drop, with violent crime falling by more than a quarter in the first 7 months of this year after a 1/3 reduction last year. Yet, the argument for an emergency is used to sidestep community voices and elected officials. This not only erodes trust, but creates a chilling effect on city governance, protests, and civic participation. Complicating matters further, The president's own Federal Emergency Management Agency is slashing security funding for the National Capital Region by almost half, a 44% cut year on year, even as federal troops are sent into the city. This mixed message raises questions. Is the federal presence truly about safety, or is it a show of political force? Historically, the use of National Guard troops in Washington has been reserved for genuine crises, such as the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. But experts warn that normalizing these deployments for political objectives risks making extraordinary federal powers part of everyday governments. As research points out, it chills protest, city governance, and normalizes executive overreach. There's also the legal line. U.S. law generally prohibits the military from direct participation in domestic law enforcement. The more often presidents push or blur this boundary, the weaker the safeguards against outright authoritarianism become. These actions could reshape how emergencies are defined, who gets to define them, and whether cities across America can continue to govern themselves without fear of direct federal takeover. The precedent set in the nation's capital could echo through every city hall in the country. Given these risks, what should citizens and city leaders actually do? Let's talk practical takeaways. Given these risks, what should citizens and city leaders actually do? Let's talk practical takeaways. How can ordinary people push back when leaders use dramatic narratives to seize power? It starts with seeing through the noise. President Trump's takeover of Washington, D.C.'s police and his deployment of 800 National Guard troops was justified as a response to runaway crime. But the city's own statistics show violent crime at its lowest in more than 3 decades, falling by over 1/3 last year alone. This is a textbook case of a manufactured crisis being used to justify extraordinary federal action. The real risk is not just in bold headlines. It's in the quiet acceptance that follows. Legal experts warn that when the public stays silent, even temporary emergency measures can chip away at core rights. The Home Rule Act, the law that lets D.C. residents elect their own mayor and city council, still gives Congress ultimate control. But if citizens do not speak up, these precedents can slowly erode local democracy everywhere. So what can you do? Civil society organizations recommend 3 powerful actions. Demand transparent data from officials, directly contact your representatives, and support independent watchdog groups who can expose and challenge government overreach. Even sharing accurate information with neighbors can make a difference. Democracy only works when people insist on facts and refuse to let fear override fairness. Complacency is costly. Once power shifts away from local hands, getting it back is a long, uphill battle. The choices made today set the stage for how much voice communities will have tomorrow. But is the fight for local self-rule in D.C. already lost, or is there still a path forward? Let's look at what the future could hold. Here's a question that could shape the next chapter of American democracy. Will we let authorities rewrite reality, or will we demand the truth before power is taken from our hands? The stakes are real. Lose vigilance now, and we risk watching our basic freedoms and rights slip away, not just in Washington, D.C., but everywhere. President Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C.'s police force and the deployment of 800 National Guard troops were sold as a response to a crime spike. But here's the sharp reality. Violent crime in D.C. had actually dropped to its lowest level in over 3 decades. And in just the first 7 months of this year, violent crime fell another 26%, with overall crime also declining. When leaders claim emergencies that do not exist, it threatens not just one city, but the very foundation of self-government. Today, it's Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, it could be your own community, especially if we accept unchecked federal power without demanding clear proof. The Home Rule Act, meant to let D.C. citizens choose their own leaders, is now under direct threat from the federal government. This is not an isolated case. It echoes past moments when federal troops entered cities over local objections, blurring the line between defense and deception and setting a perilous standard. This crisis isn't about left versus right. It's about who decides what is real, what is urgent, and who holds power in a democracy. If made-up crises can justify sweeping federal action, we all stand to lose the norms that safeguard our safety, freedoms, and ability to hold leaders to account. So, will we surrender to narratives spun by the powerful, or stay anchored to facts before giving up control? Our answer will define what democracy means, not just for D.C., but for every one of us. Next, let's examine how history warns us about the dangers of unchecked power, and what everyday citizens can do when the lines between protection and control begin to blur.